It's theater. And I'm being confronted by gatekeepers who have literally said to me, how are we going to keep our audience safe? My response is, that's not my job as an artist. That's the opposite of my job. My job as an artist is to poke and prod and to make audiences feel something.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Kristen Marding, and this is Torches. Today we have my longtime collaborator, James Scruggs. James is an award-winning artist who creates large-scale topical theatrical productions, live and virtual, and often interactive. I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. Welcome, James.
Hey.
Hey. So what first drew you into downtown performance?
For as long as I can remember, I've been a pipe dream artist. You know, one day I was gonna, and I worked at the World Trade Center, as you well know, and I was making six figures. I was making a lot of money. So I didn't have time to be an artist because artists were poor, and I was not trying to be poor. When 9/11 happened, I decided to follow what was in my heart, and I left corporate America. I could have gotten a job anywhere because the outpouring was crazy. I decided to pursue a career in theater, and people said, you got to apply for a lot of stuff because you're not going to get it, but you got to apply for a lot. I applied for here. I applied for a Franklin Furnace thing. I applied for something. I got a lot. I got a residency here, and that's what kind of launched that's what launched my career. But I mean, for the longest, it's something that I wanted to do. And I don't know that I would have had I not been financially separated. I'm sorry, of course, the 9/11 disaster was a tragedy. But if it did not happen, I don't know that I would be an artist because I'm shallow and it's hard to walk away from six figures. You know what I'm saying?
The work that you did there, I know, was multimedia work. And then once you started making work in downtown, you really blur the boundaries between theater and video and live and recorded. And you think a lot about that in the work. Did that background come into your art making, or did you already have that and that was just part of the way you see how to create
it
things?
really helped. It really helped because I was a technical director, but I was also a technician. I was a guy crawling on the floor taping down cables, and I got exposed to a lot of technology. And as you know, when we first started working together, I would bring cables and just a lot of black boxes and stuff. So yeah, it did. It was annoying. Working in corporate America because people would show up like it was art, and doing these like commercial projects, which is it was just annoying, but it was really good and refreshing and scary and rewarding to strive to make art using my technical background.
And when you first came out, you were trained originally as an artist. You went to Pratt, I think? Yeah.
I went to Pratt for photography, and I graduated from the School of Visual Arts with a degree in film. And I was the first one in my family to get a degree. And I got my degree in film, and I was like, I'm ready to go into the film industry. And I didn't know at the time that a degree in film is just like a degree in modeling. It's like, it's very nice, but show me your portfolio. What can you do? And literally, my degree would have gotten me to be able to sweep the floor in any production company I wanted to do that in New York. But I was like not trying to do that. So I fell into corporate audiovisual stage management, which was very lucrative.
So you had developed a lot of skill and craft through those backgrounds. And then when you came into live performance, how did you balance that kind of craft with the experimentation that you were doing in theater, which was newer to you?
It was kind of an easy transition because I was like, I wasn't afraid of technology. And I had a lot of crazy ideas because of this thing, this 9/11 thing happened. I was, it made me brave, oddly enough. I mean, I know what fear looks like. Fear looks like my coworkers looking at the floor-to-ceiling windows in the world, seeing that plane come to them. So I whenever I got like a little scared, I'm like, this is not scary, And it's funny, when I was doing Disposable Man, I didn't know that I was going to perform it. And I was working with you, and I asked you to direct me, and they told me, you can't ask the executive artistic director to direct your first piece. And I'm like, I didn't know. But I mean, I embrace my ignorance that helps me, because if I had known, I wouldn't have asked you, because I would have known it's inappropriate.
I said yes because
You
I thought it
did.
was such an amazing project.
You
I wanted
did,
to
and they
be
were like,
involved.
"Whoa!" They were like, and she said yes, and I'm like, "Yeah." But yeah, but I didn't know that I was going to perform it. I thought, I'm going to workshop this, and eventually we get a real actor to do this at some point. And then when I realized I was going to perform it, I was like, I was reminded of that Little Rascals thing where the episode where the guy gets on stage and he's like stage struck, and I'm like, I hope that's not me.
I think it worked out.
It did.
You take a lot of risks in your work. That's an example of a risk, but also in terms of the content, the subject matter, the form. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's a really big risk that you felt like you took?
I'm not a trained actor, which also serves me, because, doing Disposable Men, I had to perform pretty atrocious historical events.
Yeah.
The nigger is over there.
Coming right? No. No.
And I didn't internalize it. I'm not an actor. I don't know method act. And people would ask, how do you do that? And I'm like, first of all, I'm wearing a dildo, for the first 25 minutes of the piece. And I got to hit the mark. So I'm saying the right words in the right order and hitting the thing and trying not to get this dildo to fall out. The dildo was part of the piece.
I think you need to explain why it wasn't that
I never do a piece without a dildo.
or that I forced you to wear a dildo. So why don't you explain what your idea was with the dildo?
Au contraire. I remember we had several discussions about it because it wasn't working. There was a part in the piece, as you well know, where the character was exploring the tension that lives between black men and white women. And I had 3 rings in my pants connected to the dildo, and I would find 3 white women and give the 3 rings to the 3 white women. I would back up, unzip my pants, and pull out the dildo, which was the same shade as me. And then the dildo would drop, but it was exploring the tension that lives between white women and black men historically.
And for the visual, it was a string connected to the ring. So the string was stretching from the white woman's hand to your pants and then to the dildo. And at first, the impression was that was your actual cock. And instead, it was a dildo. And so it was a moment that we were doing a kind of sleight of hand with the audience and playing with their discomfort.
Yeah.
That was certainly a risky moment. But I think you were going somewhere else when you mentioned that example.
Because I'm not a trained actor, and I lean into that. I remember you were telling me that there's a good chance that they may not play along, James, But we did several performances, and every white woman I gave it to took the ring with the exception of one woman. And I was about to give her the ring, and she started shaking. and she was sitting next to her husband or her boyfriend or whatever, and I was like, if she takes this ring, he's going to beat the shit out of her, you know. So I'm like, okay, I let her go. But everybody else, you know, not knowing, like I did not know that they would not take it. They took it, you know, because I had that intention.
Not for them two, black man, white woman alone on the screen. We both know what's at stake. You make a choice. You know that if you scream, they're gonna believe you no matter what I say.
I think the whole piece,
Yeah.
looking back on it, but I mean, I didn't have anything to compare it to.
Could you share a bit more of what the piece was about?
It was a piece that I came to here with. It's funny. I remember I told you what Tony was your person, and she said, "Everybody, put your press material up on the stage." I didn't have any, and I was almost in tears because I'm like, they're gonna boot me out. And I went up to Tony, and I'm like, I don't have any press material, and she's like, "That's okay." And I'm like, all that to say, things are very different now. At the time, I was admitted into the HARP program based on the strength of my piece, which was amazing. It was amazing, you know, because I had no experience. But the piece was about the uncanny similarity that African American men and Hollywood monsters share in the way that the crazy and inventive ways that we get killed, 41 bullets, being dragged around town. And we had, to your organizational talent, we had several different screens, and we decided what was going to be on each screen, and nobody got confused, which was amazing. We had a screen which was the mythology, and a screen which was other aspects of the piece. And because we separated the material, there was monster footage on one. When the white woman got the ring, there was a creature from the Black Lagoon was swimming underneath this white woman swimming. So it was really obvious, you know, and the audience unpacked it, and they were able to follow it, which was, I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. My mother would say it was a lot of sugar for a dime.
And we spent a long time developing the work, and a funny anecdote of it was that when we started, I remember that Hal Eager, who was the technician that we were working with, he had to manually operate 8 different VCRs in order to make sure all the cues came out the way we needed to. And then I think by the time we premiered, we were completely on Isadora by then. And so we were completely digitally controlling the show. But when we were first trying to figure out how the show worked, it was still a manual universe that we were existing in technology-wise.
Very analog. Very analog. It's like dinosaur stuff.
We had a character that had to move across the floor, and Hal came up with an ingenious way for that to happen in an automated way using a moving light, but with a projector attached to it instead of a light. And that was a character that you interacted with in the real space. Have you run into failure in taking those big risks?
Yeah. That was the one thing I looked at. I'm like, and I was saying, I've never experienced failure. Right. I did a piece at 3LD, Deepest Man, which was a piece about a guy who was in a therapeutic community who would put his head into a sink and pretend that he was freediving. Because we needed underwater footage, Kevin Cunningham was a crazy white man, and he knows that, insisted that we go to Mexico and shoot underwater in cenotes. We got gorgeous video. It was gorgeous. And what happened was the technology and the pretty images just took us so far away that by the time the piece was about to be performed, I was hard pressed to know what it was about. I got, you know, so it was a failure in a sense that, you know, we got seduced by the technology. It was beautiful stuff, but I mean, you know, and we didn't get slammed. I'm like, theatrically. I mean, with reviews, they, you know, they were like basically, I don't know what it was about, but you know, wasn't it pretty?
You were talking about disposable men, and obviously that was thinking about Black men. So how have you felt pressure to explain or translate your experience as a Black queer artist to the audiences? Have you felt that?
You outing me in front of everybody, Lord.
Do you not want me to?
No, but it's too late now. No, I'm out. I'm Black. I'm gay. It's obvious to me. I'm finding with institutions and theaters that are not brave, they are striving to around the corners of history, and the work that I'm interested in doing is dealing with actual history, Wikipedia proof history. When I was coming up in 2005, there were things that were right and things that were wrong. Now everything is, there's truth and there's alternate facts. I've been confronted by theaters who would want me to do some kind of a disclaimer, some kind of trigger warning, which I refuse to do. And I did a piece about it, and basically until Brianna and Trayvon and Philando get trigger warnings, I'm not giving one. It's theater. It's theater, and I'm being confronted by gatekeepers who have literally said to me, "How are we going to keep our audience safe?" My response is, that's not my job as an artist. That's the opposite of my job. My job as an artist is to poke and prod and to make audiences feel something. They don't have, it's funny, when I did 3/5, SupremacyLand, a piece where we did a full-blown ethno-theme park. Time Out said, it's the most uncomfortable you'll be in a theater, and then we sold out. So there is an appetite for people to feel something, and I feel like I've gone and I've seen shows and I didn't feel shit, and I'm like, it has failed. I want to feel something, and uncomfortable is something.
Absolutely, and when you're in that space of creating that discomfort for the audience, I feel like it relates to a lot of your work is dealing with racial injustice and social inequity. And so it feels like that's part of what you're trying to have the audience experience, especially like in 3/5. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Again, Kevin Cunningham, crazy white man. He gave us 10,000 square feet, 4 theatrical spaces in 3LD Art and Technology Center. We had 4 weeks of rehearsal and 4 weeks of show. And we turned the space into SupremacyLand, and it was a head-on confrontation with white supremacy. It was a theme park heralding white supremacy. All of the Black SupremacyLand employees wore a name tag that simply said nigger on it, and I had the hardest time with just about everybody. Are you sure you want to do that? And I'm like, this is not ironic. This is not, in 1930, 1940, if I walked in the room, they would say, who's that nigger? It's that's the way it was. And it was so many things, but I was allowed to go there. It's challenging, walking around in a large Black male body, especially when confronted with policemen, and I've had confrontations, so I know what that feels like, and I'm really interested in my work to bring that forth.
What made you decide to choose art as your mode of expression rather than going into politics or into organizing?
I've always been an artist, and I've always wanted to do something. I was this pipe dream artist. I wanted to do film. Film was expensive and difficult, and theater seemed easier to me for some reason. And I was able to explore and take risks, and to bring forth things that were really, really important to me. I'm not the guy that is walking around in a placard. But in my heart, I'm a revolutionist. I'm revolutionary. Revolutionary, not with a placard, but with my art. That's a viable option.
Yeah.
For me.
You talked before about some gatekeepers and institutions talking about trigger warnings. I personally have always been of the opinion that, the marketing copy tells you what the show is, and you come and you have the experience you have, and that anything else takes away, it's defanging the art. So I'm really with you that the trigger warnings don't make sense to me, because I think you can give people a sense of what they're in for through the marketing copy for the show. But that was one way that, maybe an institution was failing your need as an artist. Are there ways that institutions have supported or failed to support your work that you'd want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm that guy that applies for a lot of shit, and it's like, I got 3 MAP grants, a Creative Capital, a Guggenheim, and it didn't like fall in my lap. I applied for these things. I applied for a Guggenheim like 3 or 4 times. I've been supported, and I've had people tell me, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I'm like, well, maybe, but, I also do a lot of fucking applying. Can I say fuck?
Yes. Definitely.
No, but I think, in order to, and I've been told, and I truly believe that if you're an artist and you're not getting rejections, you're not applying enough. Mm-hmm. I'm applying enough, because I've been getting a lot of emails that start with "unfortunately." I don't read the whole thing, but it's just like, "unfortunately," and I'm like, delete. But yeah, I can say that I have been supported. Just about every piece that I came up with that I wanted to bring to stage has gone to stage. And that's an unusual trajectory in New York as a playwright, because I know a lot of playwrights get caught up in reading hell. And that's another, I think it's a reading is really important if the playwright and the company believes it's important. But it's for me, it's a step toward a production. In 2025, readings have become a thing. I was invited to a reading that was $40, and I'm like, I think it.
Did you go for $40?
I did not go for $40. I mean,
No.
we only charge $25 for 3/5. I don't get to decide what people consider an opportunity. And I get that, a reading could be viewed as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. For me, it's a step toward a production.
Yeah, your work is very embodied, and tech is always a big part of it. And there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of music. So it feels like for you, what's more useful is a rehearsal in space, not just a reading.
Yes.
But a reading, yes, a step along the way. How has access to resources changed your work?
When I was coming up in 2005, I came up with a cohort of artists, and I was 40, and everybody else was 20. And now everybody else is 40, and I'm 69.
Looking good.
And even then, it was like, there was talk like, oh, the arts funding is diminishing. It's scant right now. It's really challenging. A lot of opportunity. MAP is no longer there, and the MAP grant was a large grant that you could apply for. There was no charge for, you didn't have to pay to apply, and you could, if you got it, you get a fair amount, a real chunk of money. But now it's very different. It's very challenging. I feel sorry for artists who are coming out now and figuring out how to make work, where to go. But whenever I'm in front of artists, I invite them to ask for what they want. And I remember I was in the, I think it was probably the Here residency program. Chloe was this attractive white female artist, and she said, I'm going to do this piece with horses and in a drive-in theater with projectors. And I was like, good luck with that shit, And then 3 weeks later, she came in with video from it. And I'm like, fuck, how did you, and she said, because I asked for it. that changed everything for me, you know.
That was Clove Galilee, for the
Clove.
record. Yes, and Clove was the daughter of Ruth
Brewer.
Malachek and Lee Brewer of Mabou
Clove,
Mines.
yes.
Yes.
She changed everything for me because when she came back and she said, I asked for it, and I was just like, I want to be a white, female, pretty artist. And then I realized that, you know, that's one option, but the real deal is that, you know, she asked for it.
Yeah.
I am now that guy. I asked for what I want. I was doing a piece on 9/11, and I found this guy in the New York Times. Mark Desire was his name. And I told him I wanted to know more about, you know, the forensics of it. He invited me to his lab. He spent an hour and a half with me, and he told me that regarding 9/11, with a tic-tac size piece of genetic material, they could match it to a human. And it was just amazing. What I'm saying is that I reached out to this guy blind. Hi, Mr. Desire, I would like to do. And, you know, he got back to me. And whenever I'm in front of artists, I remind them that, you know, the world at large is fascinated with us. Mm-hmm. And if you're bold enough to ask for what you want, you know, another friend of mine says, they're not going to punch you in the face, you know. I ain't been punched yet.
You were talking a lot about lack of resources in this time and the challenges that the field is facing. So what would a truly sustainable artistic life look like?
MacArthur grant. Just saying. Yeah, money, you know. I recently got a NPN grant to do a piece, and it's very generous. And I love the way that they support work, and it's project-based. But it would be really cool if there was a way that we could support artists like they do in other countries, where, you know, you claim to be an artist and are like, okay, well, go over there and get some money, you know, and not have to beg for it.
Are there other things besides money that would make a sustainable artistic life?
Brave theaters. And I'm finding that more and more theaters are caving. I was talking to a collaborator, and she said that she was talking about diversity, and she was told that in her academic situation, she can't use that word. Like, I'm old school. I'm apt to say inappropriate things. And to say diversity and to call out what is clearly an issue, a lack of diversity, it's problematic for a lot of theaters. And there's this push to make audiences feel safe, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I don't think the world we're living in right now is safe. So why should we feel safe
That's what I'm talking
when
about.
we're in the theater?
I can go see Texas Chainsaw Massacre and without a disclaimer or anything, and see heads get chopped off. But if I'm going to talk about enslavement and the journey of people who look like me, I got to give a trigger warning. That's crazy. It's crazy.
Who do you make your work for?
For me, you know, I make work that speaks to me. I make work that is dealing with really, really challenging, dark issues. I'm very light and silly. I'm very silly, and it's funny because I've got friends that they who've never seen my work, and they come and see my work, and they're like, "Fuck." You know, they expected, you know, rainbows and unicorns. My work is not. You know, my work is dark, and I'm okay with that, but with humor and with Disposable Men, it was very ridden with, you know, heavy racist trauma, and there was some humor, because you can't. I mean, I don't believe that you can mine this material without some kind of humor. Otherwise, it gets, you know, like you need to hand razor blades out at the end of the floor. Please slit here. You know, there's no hope.
Do you think that the spirit of downtown experimentation, risk, community, it still exists?
I don't know. I'm sure it does exist with artists. I'm finding that the brick and mortar spaces are diminishing greatly. There are different and new gatekeepers who are, I feel like they're largely seeking work that is not going to make their constituents feel uncomfortable, which is troubling. And that's why I am so proud to be associated with Here, and I'm doing a piece in the spring with Here, because Here is not afraid. It's not about being fearless. I think it's about being brave. It's about giving time and space to artists who have something to say and let them say it in the way they want to say it. And if your audiences feel whatever, it's better than not feeling anything. I'm going to see a lot of shows that I ain't feel shit, and I'm like, I want my money back. I didn't ask for my money back, but I'm like,
Do you think it has anything to do with the chilling that's happening because of the government in DC these days? Do you think it has to do with the fear of expression? Like, I mean, First Amendment rights are protected, but there's a lot of people self-censoring and not doing things because they're afraid of having funding taken away or their 501c3 interfered with. Do you think that's a part of where you're not seeing downtown as present?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not really involved with the theater community on an administrative level, but I think, it's playing a large part. If you have a theatrical space and you are relying upon national funding and you decide to show something that is against Dear Leader, then you stand the risk of losing, and that's unfortunate in a land that is supposed to be democratic.
How do you define success as an artist now? And has that definition evolved for you over time?
For now, it's like again, I am 69 years old, and I always pause after I say that so people can say no. But they're not saying that so much anymore.
Well, I said that the first time.
You did. But, for me, it's like I have decided that I will make work as long as I can find someone who will support it, who will produce it. I don't think theater is a collaborative art, and there are very few people who can write, direct, and produce their own work without it feeling incestuous. I've seen work. I saw a piece recently that was written and directed by the same person, and it could really use a rigorous director. And I've worked with really rigorous directors. One of them is you take no shorts. I remember with Disposable Men, you were like, James, you said this 3 times already. Do you really need to say it again? Because I was angry, and I have to say, and I was going back to Disposable Men. It felt weird getting a white woman to direct it, but I feel like it was perfect because I was really angry and I was full of rage, and so was the work. And if it were not for you, it would have been an angry rant. Nobody'd be able to watch it. So I think there's something that needs to happen with theater, like it needs to go through the process of different people. And very few people, I believe, are equipped to edit and be a writer and a director and a producer.
You just talked a little bit there about collaboration. You've had some collaborations along the way that have been important in your career. How have they shaped your work, or how have they strengthened your work? Or could you just talk a little bit about what collaboration means to you in your work?
From beginning, my first piece was Disposable Men, and in working with you, you were very rigorous and intentional about the work. You didn't come to me saying, I'm a director that likes blue, so the work should be blue. But you came to me and you were like, okay, how do we do this? And do we need to do it this way? And do you need to say it 3 times? I'm redundant. I'm probably redundant in this interview, so they're going to cut shit out, but that's all right. But I feel that you started the process for me, and it was a high benchmark. You know, when I look for a director, I look for a director and a collaborator that is not going to coddle me. You know, I've developed a thick skin. You know, I may go home and like, you know, whimper to myself, but I can hear stuff like, this does not work. You know, I can hear that. And I would much rather hear it from my collaborator than the New York Times, you know, and they will say that, and they have said it. But yeah, I think that I'm very interested in working with collaborators who are brave and rigorous.
How do you work against our culture's celebration of the young, over-seasoned artists? What do you think about that?
Well, in my mind, I'm telling you, if I'm in a room and they say, well, all the young artists stand up, I have to tell myself, James, they don't mean you. In my head, I'm about 35. I was on the Zoom call and they were like, oh, we're so glad to have an elder here. And I'm like, especially in the gay community, the gay community, the gay male community, the commodities are masculinity, are often masculinity and youth. If you are young and masculine and beautiful, it's all there. And if you're not, then it's, you know, it's lesser. But I'm finding that there are communities that celebrates experience. And I'm leaning toward communities that are supportive. And I'm not afraid to say my age. Did I mention I was 69? I'm not afraid to say that. And I think that I probably lost opportunities from that.
Really?
I think there is this notion that, you know, maybe, you know, the last piece he did is the last one he's going to do. But just saying, I got 3 pieces in the queue.
What kind of legacy do you hope that your work will leave for artists, for audiences, for the field at large? What legacy?
I don't know. I mean, I'm moving from Central Jersey to the Catskills, and I got boxes. Each one of my pieces, I have a box with it's from 2005. I have like the actual press paper. Like, what do I do? I was talking to an archivist, and I'm like, what do you do with that? And he was saying, you know, like to make as much of it digital. And he said the sweetest thing. He said, James, I went to the future and somebody wants to know about your work. And I was just like, oh. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, I know he didn't go to the future. But I think that there is a in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, I thought at some point I was going to, you know, get to a point similar to Beyonce, because, you know, me and Beyonce were pretty much the same, where, you know, I'll get a retrospective. It's probably not going to happen. But, you know, I do want to find a way to save the work I've done, because I think I've done some good work.
You definitely have. You've contributed to the canon, I think.
There's a really frightening thing that's happening right now with history. The history books are being manipulated, changed, made more palatable for white people, and it's really disturbing to watch that happen, and to see people take part in it. And I get it. If you're a theater and you can't really go there, wherever there is, you know. But there are some theaters where you can go there, and here's one of them. But I'm finding that they're very, very few and far between. And I so greatly appreciate them, and I'm sorry that they're falling by the wayside. And young artists who are doing work that's challenging, the options are smaller. What's cool now is that, you know, with a phone, you've got, you know, 4K quality video, you know, and you can do stuff on the street. You can do, you know, there's avenues, there's TikTok, there's things you can do that you don't need a brick and mortar theater. And I think that, you know, I think artists are leaning into the new technology. I've leaned away from it, you know. I'm not the guy that crawls on the floor and tapes down cables anymore, but I was, you know, and I respect that, you know. Yeah, I hope that we get to a point where theaters are brave and theaters come back and theaters are unafraid and theaters are willing to have their audiences deal with discomfort just like they deal with joy and happiness and sadness and romance, you know. Discomfort is another one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, James.
My pleasure.
And thanks to Hal Round for hosting us. And please come back to see more of Torches.